I have a background in health science and an MBA, and I started a manufacturing business 25 years ago, which I still run and operate today. I'm also a mother. I have 2 daughters who are, of course, amazing young women today. Now, as I describe myself to you, you probably have an image in your mind of who I am. Of course, you don't know everything about me, and some things may actually surprise you. I'm a biker. I love motorcycling. And it's something I took up just a few years ago in my early 50s. But I can tell you that when I park my bike and take my helmet off, and people look at me, a woman of rather advanced years, they certainly don't have the same image in their mind of who I am that you have. Because we tend to place people in silos based on the context that we find them in. I'd like to show you this picture. And it's an image that had the power to redirect my life many years ago. Around 1998, 1999, I happened upon an article describing the situation of women living in Afghanistan under Taliban rule. And that was well before September 11th, so Afghanistan wasn't much on anyone's radar. The article described how women there had to be completely covered from head to toe in a burqa. They couldn't leave home unless they were accompanied by a male family member. They couldn't drive. They couldn't vote. Girls couldn't even go to school. And I remember reading the article and dismissing it right away. I said, in this day and age, that's impossible that women would be invisible in their community like that. I know what women are capable of. So I just really dismissed it. The problem is, over the next weeks and months and year, I kept seeing more and more of these articles. One day I was at home, it was a Sunday morning, I was at my kitchen table and had the newspaper open in front of me, and yet again, an article about Afghanistan. This one was the story of a father who had just sold off his 9-year-old daughter in marriage to a warlord who was 20 years older than her for $750. I was incensed. I was furious. I knew that for all intents and purposes, this young girl's life was pretty well over. From everything that I had been reading in the past weeks and months, I knew that she didn't have much as a 9-year-old to bring to her new family. At best, she would be a domestic slave, and of course, she would be expected to have children at a very young age. And I was just so upset. How is it that women have such little value in so many societies? Because it wasn't just in Afghanistan, this was going on in many countries. And I guess I was talking out loud, and my daughters happened to be at the table with me at the time. And my oldest daughter turned around to me and she said, "Well, Mom, what are you going to do about it?" And the question stopped me cold. She was absolutely right. I could rant and rave and be upset, but if I didn't take action, I wasn't doing anything to help change the situation. But then, of course, the very next question that comes up is, well, what can I possibly do? I'm only one person. I have no experience in this area at all. And so I do what we all do when we have a question. And my question was, why were women seen to be of such little value in so many societies? So when you have a question, you Google it. So I started surfing the internet, and I talked to my friends and my business colleagues who would introduce me to other people. And I read, and I attended conferences because that question was bothering me to no end. And this went on for about 1.5 years or 2 years, until it became very clear to me that the issue underpinning all this was actually quite basic and quite simple. It's girls' education. Women are half of the world. I'm a business person. If I only train half of my employees, for sure my business won't succeed. And there'll be a burden on my business, and they'll probably be resented eventually by the other employees for not pulling their weight. So how is it that a community or a country can expect to thrive when it only educates half its citizens? When women are never given the chance to develop their skills and their potential, they'll always be seen as of lesser value than the men who do have access to an education. And this becomes a vicious cycle that keeps going on until that time when women, as a role model in a community, can show what she can do and to help move and improve her society. And as it turns out, education really is rather inexpensive. particularly when you think of it in terms of the stunning outcomes it has in health, on the environment, and the economy. When girls have just one more year of elementary school education, the maternal and infant death rates decrease by 10 to 15%. One more year of elementary school. If a girl manages to continue on to high school, for every additional year of high school that she gets, her potential revenue increases by 15 to 25%, which of course in turn impacts the GDP in the country. Educated girls tend to have smaller families and are less involved in child marriages. Educated mothers are much more likely to send all their children to school, both boys and girls. And girls' education decreases the incidence of HIV, AIDS, and malaria, and the list goes on. Education isn't just about getting a better job later in life. It's very much a matter of life and death for hundreds of millions of girls and women around the world. When we don't allow women to have this access to education, it's a little bit like the biker picture that I showed you before. We have no idea of what the potential is there. And don't we have so many complex issues and problems to resolve in the world that we really should be trying to reach and tap into the intelligence and the brain power and the skills and talents of every single person on the planet? So in 2006, with a group of like-minded women, we set up a foundation to support girls' education. In the 10 years since then, being all volunteers, so we have very low administration costs, we've raised and invested $2.4 million in 20 projects in 14 countries around the world. Thank you. Thank you very much. This has enabled over 20,000 children to have better access to education. And what's been really tremendous to us, too, is working with our partners in the field who've been really amazing. We've learned what works well in girls' education. I'd just like to tell you very briefly about my first trip to Africa. I was in 2005. I happened to be in Mozambique. And I was visiting community-based projects in very rural, isolated areas. And I still remember it so clearly today, being totally shocked by the prevalence of mobile phones everywhere. This was the most isolated area you can imagine, and these people were extremely, extremely poor, and yet they had cell phones. And I remember thinking at the time, well, that makes no sense. A cell phone, in my mind, was a luxury. Of course, they don't pay the same rates we do here. But it wasn't until you started talking to the community and to these people that you understood that a cell phone was actually a life-saving tool. It was information. A farmer could check ahead and see where is the best market to sell his produce. In the case of a medical emergency, help might only be a text away. And it's upended banking and financial services in a lot of companies, in a lot of countries with mobile cash transfer payments, such as M-Pesa in Kenya. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, that is really, really amazing. Here is this country who skipped over a whole generation of technology because they never had landline phones. And they went to something that was much more suited and really customized to their particular needs. And that thought stayed with me over the years as I visited many of our projects in different countries, but no more so than in 2013 when I was in Sierra Leone. We had been funding a project for high school girls' education there, and as I often do, I'd like to visit other projects and kind of benchmark where we are. So I decided to spend a bit of time also at the elementary schools. Now, elementary school in Sierra Leone in the northern district, very rural, isolated area, of course, is not at all like it is here. The classrooms, in one particular class, the teacher might have 30, 40, maybe 50 students. And the reason is that there's a huge lack of qualified teachers around the world. It's actually estimated that there's 69 million trained teachers that are still needed today to meet the demand over the next 10 years in developing countries. So you have a teacher with many students in the class, and there's usually a chalkboard, but that's pretty well it. There's not often many teaching aids, posters, or maps on the wall. The kids don't usually each have a textbook, and school supplies are in very short order. will often just be writing, practicing their letters and numbers on a slate with chalk. As you can see, sometimes the classrooms aren't even completely separate. They're only separated by a half bamboo wall, so you can imagine how it gets pretty noisy in there. And of course, there's no electricity, there's no computers, and there's no access to the internet. So when I was there, I decided to spend a little bit of time with the kids in grade 5 and grade 6. And it became very clear very quickly that they weren't learning at even close to their grade level. Their reading and writing skills were nowhere near where they should be. And it was heartbreaking, because you know how much the parents have to give up to make sure that their kids can attend school. And they count so much on a quality education to help their children and to help the family get out of poverty. And yet it wasn't working at all. In fact, it's estimated that if we continue investing and supporting education in the developing world as we have for the past 20 years, it's going to take 100 years before all girls around the world get to complete even junior secondary school. So as we were there and we were thinking of this, we said, it just doesn't really make any sense. And I kept thinking back to the idea of the mobile phones and technology and how that might be able to change things. So in 2013, we decided to do something very different, and we introduced self-directed computer-based learning. We originally started off with a Raspberry Pi, which you see, very small device. It's a wireless server, so it's basically a computer. It just doesn't have a screen or a keyboard. And the device that we're using now, we can actually download up to 500 gigs of content on this small device. Now, 500 gigs, just to give you an indication, is the equivalent of about 100,000 books or about 4,000 hours of video. So we download all this content onto this server. We place it in a room, what we call our learning center, which is sometimes just a classroom. The kids come after school, so this is an extracurricular activity, and they have access to all this material at no cost. They access it through either smartphones or tablets or computers, and up to 50 devices can connect wirelessly at the same time to one device. So the kids can work on absolutely anything that's on there. And what we've done with our partners is we've downloaded academic material. It all has to be offline, it can't be web-based. So it's somewhat limited. But what we have on there is literacy software based on phonics. There's math tutorials, science, history, geography, agriculture, health, coding, music. There is so much content on there. And what is truly interesting is that the kids can now see this material in ways that they've never seen it before. There's maps, there's games, there's interactive videos, there's talks, there's role models from around the world. And they can actually reach this content at their own pace, and they can work on what they want and what they feel they need. And what's truly amazing about this is that we can reach some of the hundreds of millions of kids around the world who don't have access to electricity or the internet, who live in rural, isolated areas, and who could benefit from some of this amazing content that's being developed around the world by some of the greatest universities, NGOs, and social entrepreneurs. Isn't it about time that we place these tools to unleash the unexpected potential, the biker, in every child, in every girl, and enable her to surprise us with what she can accomplish and change the world? Thank you.